Hello and welcome back to Cram Course, the totally not rip-off show that is not related in any way to any of the YouTube channels. It's me, Claire Baker, and this is Cram Course World History. Welcome back. Today's topic is the Enlightenment and Reformation. We start today's episode with some backstory. Before the 1500s, the Catholic Church was basically the basis of life in European society. The Pope controlled everyone because he had the power to excommunicate people. People didn't want to be excommunicated because they wanted a peaceful afterlife in heaven instead of burning up in the fiery depths of Dante's Inferno. You thought I was going to say it, but I'm keeping it G up in here. This power corrupted most, if not all, of the popes, who were basically at the top of the feudal food chain. The Reformation focused on changing this power, and this caused many people to question its authority. Popes are gaining political power to make alliances, so they're paying less attention to the church. Rulers from the Holy Roman Empire, England, France, and Spain began to increase their absolute power and wanted to weaken the Pope so they could control more land and try to take over more people. Now it's time to talk about this guy. The man, the myth, the legend, the man who started it all, the spark to the flame,
Okay, you've gone on long enough.
Alright, fine. The man's name was Martin Luther, and he basically brought on the start of the Reformation with his 95 Theses in 1517, which he posted outside of a German church by nailing it to the door. He listed 95 things. 95! That's more than the amount of complaints I have when I wake up. Things that he thought the church was doing wrong and proposed what he thought Catholicism should look like. Now that's how you get things done, children. Going on, he believed that having faith alone should grant salvation. He thought the state should have control over the church. He was against money-making for religious purposes. He translated the Bible from Latin to German to make it more readable to the masses. And his writings dispersed rapidly due to the invention of the printing press, and because more people were literate due to education becoming more important from the Renaissance, featured in our next video. The Germans loved Martin Luther's idea because they didn't like the Pope's leadership with their high taxes. They saw it as an opportunity to gain more power. As his ideas spread across Europe, more people spoke up against the church and about reforming it. There had always been individuals with problems against the church, but no one had really moved against them until Martin Luther. Such as, but not limited to, John Calvin. He wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion in 1536 and sought to destroy the power of the church in Switzerland. He wanted a separation of state and religion, and an increase of education to read the Bible. He believed that God had predetermined whether you were going to heaven or not, and that good deeds do not matter, but may show that you are predetermined for heaven.
The Bible, order now for free shipping, that is not included, must be eaten or older to order.
Now, for an open letter to King Henry VIII. First, let's see what random object gets thrown at me today. Ooh, it's a decapitated monkey hard drive. So what does this have to do with, oh yeah, King Henry VIII, yeah. This poor lady's name was Anne Boleyn. So dear King Henry VIII, talk about marriage problems. I mean, you had it all. Infidelity, death, 6 wives, the whole package. It all started with Catherine of Aragon. She wasn't producing a valid heir, only a girl. So he wanted to get divorced, but the Pope wouldn't allow it. So he split off and created his own church called the Anglican Church. This allowed him to get divorced and eventually go on to marry 5 other women. After Catherine came Anne Boleyn, who was executed. She also had a girl. Jane Seymour, who died, Anne of Cleves, who was divorced, and Catherine Howard, who was executed. And finally, Catherine Parr, who was widowed when Henry died. Through all that trouble, he had a son with Jane Seymour, and she died shortly after childbirth. But wow, this guy had a thing for Catherines and Annes. There's an entire 3 Catherines.
Anyhow, King Henry VIII of England really wanted an heir so much that when his first wife wasn't producing any males, he separated from the church just so he could divorce her and marry another woman, since the Pope refused to nullify the marriage. Might as well make your own church and lead it. In 1538, King Henry VIII passed the Act of Supremacy to create the Anglican Church. Way to cut out toxic relationships, Henry. You are a terrible person. Sorry, cold season. On to the Counter-Reformation. Basically the, no you can't do that Protestants. During the Reformation, the Catholic Church realized it could not unify Europe, so instead, it focused on defending itself against Protestant beliefs. Jesuits, those of a newer religion, became more active in missionary work and education. In 1521, the church held the Diet of Worms.
Miss Baker, does that mean they ate worms?
Memey from the past, it was basically a really intense investigation to tell Luther to disavow his writings, which he refused and was therefore excommunicated. Guess you can't worm your way out of this one, Martin Luther. The Council of Trent was formed by high church officials as the Reformation continued to grow. It was an assembly to discuss and examine basic church doctrines and goals from 1545 to 1563. Meanwhile, in the Holy Roman Empire, there was a civil war which ended with the Peace of Augsburg, 1555, which created a division between the Catholics and the Lutheran sections. Meanwhile, in the Holy Roman Empire, there was a civil war which ended with the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, which created a division between the Catholics and the Lutheran sections of the empire, and yet Calvinists still were not accepted by society. Nobody really liked those guys, which sort of makes sense because they were, going against the entire Catholic and somewhat Protestant belief systems. After a religious war in France between Catholics and Protestants, the Edict of Nantes in 1598 gave freedom to Huguenots, which were the French Calvinists. Remember all the way back to John Calvin? Dudes, to worship freely without fear of harassment, which is pretty great for them. You could say it was a huge help. And if that's not enough wars for you, there was another war that started in 1618, the 30 Years' War in Germany. That was basically the Lutheran, Swedish, and German Protestants pitted against the Holy Roman Empire in Spain. As a result of this, German power was reduced for a full century.
Yay, losing power over controversial topics!
There was a 60% population cut in some areas. However, this conflict was ended by 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, in which some princely states, or cities, chose a region to claim as their own. This settled the Protestant Netherlands Spanish Rebellion. The Protestant Netherlands finally got its full independence from Spanish rule. Last war, I promise, there was an English Civil War in 1640 between Calvinist Anglicans and Catholics. This ended in 1660, which is thought to be long after the beheading of King Charles I. Full resolution in 1688-89. These many wars greatly affected the political balance of Europe, so Spain eventually fell back from power. The religious change throughout the Reformation and Counter-Reformation went far beyond politics. Protestants and Catholics both developed new beliefs. There was also a large change in the fact that religious writers encouraged relationship and marriage rather than arranged marriages. Yay, love. However, fewer alternatives for women who could not marry because Protestantism abolished religious convents. Fathers were now responsible for the religious upbringing of children. This religious change also promoted literacy. The town of Durham, England's literacy rate, rose 27% over a span of 60 years. More people being able to read and study the Bible brought about new ways of thinking, which brings us to the Enlightenment. The time period where the entire world was super lit. No, not really. The Enlightenment was actually the political challenging of the current ways of governing. It happened between 1685 and 1815. Also known as the Age of Reason, it began in France and then spread through Europe and the New World. It was a time where people finally decided that they were more important than the church, and they could also use science if they didn't believe the church. Anyway, it also created an era of skepticism and criticism never before seen in human history. How, you ask, did people figure out stuff? They went to saloons.
It's a salon.
Oh,
Salon.
I get it. Salon.
Claire!
Okay, fine. So, salons were actually informal social gatherings where intellectuals exchanged ideas. Not the hairdressers, but oh well. The things discussed in these forums were the basic of revolutionary ideas. On to another topic. So there was this dude named John Locke. He was pretty lit. Anyways, back to this guy. His name was John Locke, and he's known as the father of liberalism, which means he was willing to discard traditional values in favor of change. He pretty much single-handedly started the period of the Enlightenment by publishing 2 treaties of government in 1689 that started new ideas on natural rights, which were rights everyone was born with. These rights were life, liberty, property, tabula rasa?
Just say that humans were born as blank slates.
Right. Sure, whatever. He also argued that it was the government's job to protect these rights, and in return, people would follow the laws of the government, and if the government didn't hold up its end of the deal, they should be overthrown. I'm sure the government approved. Now for the thought bubble. There were two governmental ideas at the time, absolutism and constitutionalism. Absolutism was the belief that a monarch should control every aspect of the kingdom. Constitutionalism was the form of government where the leader only had as much power as the people granted them. This is much like the United States, who have the Bill of Rights and all that other constitution jazz. Come on. Now in the other corner is Jean-Jacques. He believed that people were born good, unlike Locke, who thought everyone was born terrible, but that people were corrupted by society. As he said, man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. He published the Social Contract, in which he stated that the government should only have power if it was elected by the people. Okay, Stacey, how many more do we have?
Like 4, it's not that many.
Okay, so now, Diderot became the leader of enlightenment France, the land of baguettes and beheading. He published Encyclopedia in 1788, which compiled scientific, social, psychological, and mathematical philosophical knowledge. Then there was also Baron de Montesquieu. He was from France. He developed the idea that government should be split into 3 separate powers in his book, Spirit of the Laws, in 1759. If this sounds familiar to you, it's probably because it's pretty similar to our government. Each branch with different powers, checks and balances, all that good stuff. Then there was Voltaire, who made political satire and comedy on the government, much like many people do today, but slightly more sophisticated. He wrote works like Candide in 1759 that commented on how humans and government are all corrupted and how the perfect life does not exist. One famous line from Candide goes like this: "Do you believe," said Candide, "that men have always massacred each other as they do today? That they have always been liars, cheats, traitors, ingrates, brigands, idiots, thieves, scoundrels, gluttons, drunkards, misers, envious, ambitious, bloody-minded, calumniators, debauchees, fanatics, hypocrites, and fools? Do you believe," said Martin, "that hawks have always eaten pigeons when they have found them?" Ooh, burn. Okay, next slide. Oh wait. Candide was banned widely because of political, religious, and intellectual hostility. He believed that all humans should have the rights granted to us in the First Amendment, except the Bill of Rights hadn't come out yet. But actually, almost all of our rights in America come from ideas that were started in the Enlightenment: 3 branches of government, unalienable rights, the right to overthrow the government if they become corrupt, and many more. Voltaire also worked to battle inequality with his writing. Then women's rights came to the forefront with writers like Mary Wollstonecraft and Olympia de Gouges, who was an abolitionist as well as a women's activist. Next up, we have the only Adam Smith, the man with the most original name ever. This is the dude that wrote the book Wealth of Nations in 1776 about free trade in markets. He wanted trade without government involvement. He also believed the laissez-faire, a political policy of letting things take their course. He rejected mercantilism and favored individual competition for trade. Now for enlightened despots, which was a form of government where rights were given back to the people because leaders were so impacted by the Enlightenment. Famous despots include Prussia's Frederick the Great, who ruled from 1740 to 1786. Frederick built up military, centralized government, and granted freedom of the press and religion to his people, as well as decreasing harsh punishments. As these militaries gained power, wars were very common in the West. Russia's Catherine the Great, who ruled from 1762 to 1796, wrote letters to Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot. She reduced torture and increased tolerance in her country. And finally, Austria's Joseph II, who ruled from 1780 to 1790. Joseph II made the most radical changes to the ruling system out of these 3. He granted religious equality, freedom of press, and abolished serfdom. However, this all canceled after he died. Okay, but this guy tried to pass over 11,000 laws. Talk about an overture, like 11,000. Just think on that for a second. These despots gave back certain rights, but nothing that would limit their power in the slightest. Thank you. This brings us to the end of another educational, but oddly written edition of Cram Course. Join us again next time for the Renaissance and Scientific Revolution.